Okay, this is an interesting video. It's about who killed the compact car. I know it sounds a little silly because you hear stuff about who killed the electric car, but the compact car itself is actually something that's a pretty viable form of transportation. I mean, really small personal vehicles. You don't see any personal vehicles, and they try telling you it's not because there's any, it's because there's no money in it. But that's not the case. I mean, there's been an agenda to eliminate small, affordable transportation since practically the beginning of the automobile industry. I mean, you study it. I mean, Henry Ford was really the guy who brought the car to the average American and the average person in the world. If it wasn't for people with the idea that we could sell a car to an average middle-class American, or anyone for that matter, we wouldn't be driving cars today. All right. So you have several parties here who are trying to pursue the idea of a bigger, expensive car. The automotive manufacturers, yes, are one of them. The other group would be the insurance companies. Another group would be the governments and also the petroleum industry. All right, we'll start off with the car companies. I mean, one of the ways you introduce a new product in the market is try to sell it as a luxurious item to those who have the money to basically get back your capital really quickly. You have to put money aside to invest, so you're going to sell the item at a higher price because you have a lot of startup costs. So it's easier to sell a car as a luxury item if there's no cars in the market than it is to try to sell it to the average person. So for many years, cars became more luxurious. They had fancy trim, fancy, items, little luxury features, styling. Basically, there was an intention to make the car bigger and more expensive so that the wealthy people, who were basically the ones in the market really to purchase a car, would buy one. So there was that kind of like tradition for many years. And cars were big and expensive, and then, middle-class cars came around and more affordable cars came. But America, for many years, it was basically one type of car in the showroom, one general model of a car and different trim lines attached to it. That was it. It was just like a one-size-fits-all type thing. So in order to try to make their cars seem better in the market, they made them bigger, flashier, more expensive. And it wasn't until about the 1960s when they realized that there was a market for a compact car. Now, the compact car market was because of many reasons. A lot of times people were driving only themselves to work. They didn't need a huge car. They also said, hey, I live in the city. There's no room for me to park my car, so let me have a smaller car. All right, and even to this day, it's funny because American subcompacts are probably about the size of the average European car. All right, I mean, a hatchback over here is like a rare thing. But the automotive industry really found that there was a lot of profit in these larger cars. I mean, back in the 1970s, it cost roughly the same price to build a Chevy Vega subcompact as it did as a full-size Chevy Caprice, which was somewhat of a luxury car. Both the cars were completely different vehicles, and you would assume that the bigger one, because of all the raw materials, would cost a lot more, but it really didn't. They were roughly the same price to build, but they were, they charged the consumer totally two different prices. The subcompact was charged for one rate, and the larger car was charged for obviously a higher rate. And that was because they learned that consumers, when you pull up a big, nice car in front of them, it's easier to sell it. It's like, well, this car has so many luxury features, it costs so much to build, it just has so much technology in it that, it really needs to cost this much. It's easier to sell something like that than it would be to pull up a little subcompact and be like, well, it costs this much because, well, it's a car, So the American consumer, it's easier to trick them with a larger vehicle. Also, the petroleum companies had a little hand in this. The petroleum companies obviously want more profit, and larger cars for the standard, tend to get worse mileage than a compact car. So the companies are encouraged, all right, to build these larger cars because it helps the petroleum industry. But the petroleum industry, the way that they're intertwined, because you say petroleum industry doesn't really do anything with cars. They don't build cars, they don't have too many people like really, talking to the automotive companies, but it's the stock market. The reality is that the petroleum companies and automotive companies, for a while, were investing in one another, because if they do their business well and succeed, which is their job, they know that the other business is going to succeed. So if you have money that's laying around, your excess profit, and you're like, oh, this is my revenue, what am I going to do with it? Let's invest it. And one of the ways to do such was to buy stock. So they would try to buy stock in companies that were similar to their own. They didn't really diversify in that sense, but the idea is that they knew if they did well, their companies they're associated with will also do well. So therefore, the petroleum companies had a little hand in this. And what they would do is they would start releasing reports. Let's say if a compact car came out, this car isn't safe, this car isn't good, it doesn't work the way it's supposed to. And then what they would do is they start selling that company's stock. Put some scares in the market, sell it for a fraction of the price. And that made the whole wave come in. Everyone's like, oh my God, if everyone's selling their stock, I got to sell mine before I lose any more money. And it would basically depreciate the value of the company, and people wouldn't look into it anymore to purchase a vehicle or invest in. But the real guys getting into the mix are the last one. But here's a party that I think I should introduce first, which is the whole insurance industry. Years ago, the insurance industry said, you give us seatbelts, we'll lower rates. They never did. All right, it was just another way for them to save their end of the bargain, because perhaps there'd be less injuries. Insurance companies still do their little crash tests or promote crash tests and promote certain cars as being safer than others according to their numbers. And the whole thing is that they like larger cars. Why would they like larger cars? Well, maybe it's because they want you to be in a car that perhaps might be safer. So this way that, you know, if you get in an accident, you don't get hurt and don't cost them money. But in reality, it's because larger cars, all right, usually cost more to insure. You see, what they do is they say, well, your car's so expensive, you paid so much on the sticker price, it's going to probably cost a lot to repair a lot of the parts and features in this car, so we have to charge you a little bit more. And you know what? That large car, you know, you can do more danger on a road with one of those large cars. You could go through a house with that car versus the compact car. All right. And then it gets into the government. The government is one of the biggest pushers, all right, of a large car. All right, you know, yeah, they give subsidies for people who purchase certain large vehicles, but let's be honest here, the government wants you to buy a large car for multiple reasons. First off the bat, larger cars have a higher sales price. Higher sales price means a higher tax on the car. Right now in Connecticut, there's actually a separate sales tax for an automobile versus your average sales tax when you buy like groceries, let's say. It's higher when you buy a car, all right? They know that if you're going to buy an expensive item, they're going to want to make a bit more money off of it, all right? So what happens here is that governments, state and federal, like when you have a larger car. It's more tax money. And many states, every year you have to pay not just your registration, but a tax fee, all right, on your car for owning a motor vehicle. There is motor vehicle taxes, and it changes. If you have a more expensive car, you pay more in taxes. All right, also, if the government loves it, the federal government, because let's say you have a car that's really big and eats up a lot of gas. They charge you a gas guzzler tax. That's more money in their pocket. And then every time you go to the pump, like I said, larger cars, let's assume you're buying more fuel. There's state and federal taxes on the gasoline you're buying at your pump. So the state and federal government are making more money off of your gas purchase, all right, let alone standard sales tax that usually applies here. So they're making a lot of money off of your car, all right, if it's a big expensive car. All right, a compact car, on the other hand, there isn't so much money in it. All right, there's just not enough money for them to really, you know, promote. And honestly, look at the way the world's going here. Streets are getting crowded, you know, a lot of people go to work, one person a car. Wouldn't it make sense to have a small personal car? I mean, something small and efficient. You know, I mean, if we'd allow people to drive motorcycles on the road, I have a moped, I drive around. I sometimes would like to be in a small four-door, like quadricycle, I guess you could call it. I would like that, a small neighborhood car. All right, but the thing is that all your cars need to be crash tested. Back in the 60s, we wrote a series of laws protecting the basic big automotive manufacturers so that new upstarts in the automotive industry couldn't get their cars registered. They don't meet all these certain requirements and laws. You need all these lawyers and money and time to invest into. And then you have the whole factory issue. It needs to fit certain laws and requirements. You know, automobiles, I mean, think about it. We already have the technology to build an enclosed four-wheel, like, scooter, let's say, a moped, right? We could have ourselves, you know, like a little tiny, you know, vehicle that gets great mileage in travel highway speeds. But if you're in an event of an accident, you're probably not doing so well. But I think about that to myself a lot. I'm like, well, it's my own life. I'm the controller of my own destiny. If I really want to drive a car that, say, isn't that safe, shouldn't it be up to me and not the government? I mean, you know, they think like, well, we're trying to help you out, you know, it's not safe for you, but it's my life. I can do what I want. If you really want to make everything safe, we should close restaurants because I can get food poisoning. You know what? We should even get rid of cars because you can get into an accident, you know? It's just unbelievable. I mean, pretty soon why don't we just get rid of, you know, knives and chairs, you know, because people have accidents with those too. All right. You know, so honestly, I mean, there is an agenda to kill the compact car. And right now in America, even if you wanted to build a car, it would take so much money to get going. It would take probably, let's say, at least $1.5 billion to sell 100,000 cars a year, like at like a $20,000 range with the same reach, perhaps maybe as like a Ford Explorer. I mean, that's at a minimum $1.5 billion of capital to sell a car at 20 grand, regardless of what it is. It's unbelievable. You don't have enough money to do this. No one can start a car company in their backyard anymore, you know. So once again, I believe that when we talk about, you know, who killed the electric car, we should also talk about just conventional compact cars. How come we don't have personal cars? You know, pretty interesting to think about. That's all I have to say.